right now, we're going to be joined by friend of the show, Professor Harvey Kaye, and we're also going to be joined by Professor Minsky. We have had them on the show several times talking about the Economic Bill of Rights, which ties into literally everything that we're discussing this morning, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about the wellness of our families, our households, our communities, we have to talk about the economic condition. Good morning to both of you. We have a full house this morning, but I'm glad to have all of you this morning. How are you? Professor Kaye, you're on mute. It is the most common phrase. I think that has to be the most common phrase of the pandemic. You're on mute. Good morning to both of you. How are you?
Doing great. Up early for you and the gang.
Oh no,
yeah,
I definitely
I'm in Los Angeles, so it's nice and nighttime here still.
Oh, goodness. Alan, I really do want to thank you for getting up this early. I want to lean right into the conversation so I don't hold either one of you. But we've talked about it on the last time that you were here, the case for why we need a new economic bill of rights, so that we can get to it for the audience. Would you enumerate what would be an economic bill of rights? And I think maybe that would help people to understand why it's so important.
Go ahead, Harvey.
Oh, I was parsing plenty of you. Well, an economic bill of rights is an idea that's been a part of the progressive tradition for some time. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party for some time has basically turned its back on it. It goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, who in 1944, in the State of the Union message, laid out, well, in the 1944 State of the Union, responded to American aspirations for guaranteed universal health care, guaranteed education for young people as far as they were able to pursue it, and guaranteed jobs with living wages, and a host of other things, which we've also tried to include and enhanced. Well, it's also the case that even though this was laid out and Americans wanted it, as polling showed, 85% wanted guaranteed universal health care, in the course of the Cold War and beyond, the Democrats seemed to lose touch with it. Surprisingly, in 1960, and I really want to highlight this, it's not in our article, in 1960, the Democratic Party platform actually called for pursuing the Economic Bill of Rights and laid out the platform entirely in terms of that. Then A. Philip Randolph, responding in good part to the opportunities provided by Lyndon Johnson in the Great Society moment, proposed a freedom budget, which was a 10-year plan to abolish poverty, renew rural life, transform urban life, and address questions of structural racism. Martin Luther King Jr., only weeks, months at the most before his assassination, also called for an economic bill of rights. So this has been part of the tradition, part of the, if you like, the legacy. However, for too many years, Democrats turned their backs on these kinds of aspirations.
That's the part. Yes.
And here we are. I'm sorry. Yes. And here we are.
No, I wanted to go ahead, finish that thought, because when you say the Democrats, that's where I was getting ready to ask Brother Allen. And just for the sake of time, Brother Allen, the stuff that Professor Harvey Kaye just outlined seems to be absolutely reasonable. Healthcare for everyone, jobs for everyone. I mean, these things are not rocket science. These are things that are not only good, but also help the economy. So if these are things that are winning propositions, I think Professor Kaye was getting ready to nail this question. But why is it so difficult to get even our people, Democrats, to support it?
Well, there was a shift in the sort of economic organization of American society with Ronald Reagan. And for the most part, the Clinton administration coming in as the sort of, as the basis for how the Democratic Party was going to approach the economy starting in the 1990s, basically acquiesced to the strategies that were developed during the Reagan years. And so what happened was there was less progressive social spending after that. And as Harvey pointed out, the two periods in which an economic bill of rights were pushed was at the end of the Roosevelt administration for a few years after that. We did have what could be seen as a more inclusive, though not inclusive adequately at all because of structural racism, social democratic economic social contract in the 40s and 50s. And it was, of course, attempted to be expanded in the 1960s by the Democratic Party. Economic turbulence in the 1970s and basically an economic reaction starting with Reagan that the Democratic Party more or less absorbed, except on the margins of the party, in the 90s, in the noughts. And then the market crash occurred in 2008. And I think there was enough dissatisfaction with the results of the American economy across the general population. You saw the Occupy demonstrations in 2011. You have the Sanders campaign in 2016. And I think with the Sanders campaign, the emergence of the squad, again, following about now, what are we on, about 14 years, where, the prospects for upward mobility in the society have really stalled. And they were on life support. If you actually look at the statistics in the 90s and the noughts, American social mobility had really declined, but it's pretty much flatlined since the market crash of 07-08. Yeah.
To say the least. Professor Kaye, I want to come back to you, and Pastor Galloway and Sister Ford, I would love for you to get in on the conversation. I just want to proposition or give you this. I heard Alan talking about the Clinton administration. One of the things that I have a chance to talk to my mother about on this side of the Clinton administration was how the Clinton administration used Black mothers, my Black mother, to end the safety net as we knew it with the welfare to work program. And I had a chance to spend some time with her, and turns out that back in the 90s, they were hiring a bunch of Black women to go into the Black communities and get the Black women off. And I'm using this because there was racist jargon, there was racist undertones, to get them off of welfare and back to work. And the biggest irony, Professor Kaye, I know you would understand this, was that when we think back about it, she wasn't working for the government. She was working for Lockheed Martin. The checks came from Lockheed Martin back in the 90s, a part of the Clinton administration's plan to get Black people off the safety net. Could you just kind of dovetail? I know that's a big one, but could you dovetail how insidious that is to connect the defense contracting industry with the removal of the safety net from the Black community using Black mothers by Bill Clinton, no less?
Well, the first thought that comes to mind is of all people, President Dwight Eisenhower's warning in his farewell address to be wary of the military-industrial complex. It's also notable, I believe it was Clinton who told his cabinet, maybe told all Americans, that I can't recall, that we're all Eisenhower Republicans now. But in fact, if we were all Eisenhower Republicans now in the 90s, we would not have seen Lockheed Martin going out and trying to literally replace a decent, or developing welfare system in America. I mean, sorry, that story just literally threw me back. That's how I didn't know that. That is amazing.
I didn't know it either until I didn't really put the pieces of the puzzle together until I started doing this work, Georgia. That finally I thought about it, and I remember my mother working with the Clinton administration. But then I was like, I never remember working with the Clinton administration, but I do remember her working for Lockheed Martin. And it took about, I don't know, what's that, 20, 30 years before I realized that the government used Black people to go and destroy the safety nets here that we need, that all people need. And then that money was going to defense contractors. But it just really speaks to how stories can go hidden for decades, and they're right on our noses.
If I could just mention, sorry, Georgia, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I mean, I was just going to say, I think it's fascinating, Ben, that it comes to light eventually, but then also the juxtaposition of those efforts against certain administrations really using derogatory language to talk about Black women on welfare. I recall a very famous speech where, there was this depiction of the welfare queen. And so I think, the question here, when we talk about any type of economic bill, we have depended on different administrations and politicians to pass this. And it seems like, at almost every turn they failed. So what it makes me think about is like, how can we, as the people, do what we need to do to create a better economy, without their approval? Because if we're waiting on them, I mean, we're going to be waiting another 60 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, Pastor Galloway, I want you to get the last word on this particular segment. Professor Kaye and Brother Allen, if you don't mind hanging past the break, we want to expand the conversation after 9 o'clock. But Pastor Galloway, I know you have to go. Would you just get a little word here on this conversation and tell everyone how they can support your work?
Well, no need, because Georgia already said it. So I'm not about to re-explain the point that she already hit. If you want to know how you can support this work, support Georgia Fort. Go to georgiafort.com and look at that coverage there. Georgia, I thank you so much for making that connection between the Reagan smear tactics around welfare and those things, and the softer, the quote unquote softer, more veiled phase. This is one of the reasons why folks get really misled to think that, particularly for communities of color, that there is not a critique of the Democratic Party as much as there is the Republican Party, and so that assumption needs to get checked. And I think, Georgia, your point really underscored that. But if you want to look at support, and I thank you for having me on, and thank you for that information and making those connections. Support Black women, support Black journalists, and support Georgia Fort.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
support
you. Thank you,
Georgia Fort. And I'm going to support Georgia Fort also by saying, Georgia, if you got to get out of here also, it's a beautiful Friday. Go and do what you have to do, because you have been doing an amazing job in everything that you do to support.
Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. We're speaking this morning with Professor Harvey Kaye and Alan Minsky. We're discussing the Economic Bill of Rights. I wanted to take a few more minutes to dig into it, because I need this to connect. I need this to connect with the audience, because I need people to understand that if you call us progressives, if you call us leftists, I don't care what you call us, so long as you get us health care for all, Medicare for all, get us livable wages, give people something that they can use to survive. So Professor Kaye and Brother Minsky, if you would help us to understand and connect this, why should people start advocating for the Economic Bill of Rights?
I think the problem right now, it is, of course, an instrument of messaging. And I think that the Democratic Party, and particularly the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, struggles with messaging. We obviously don't have the kind of money behind us that the right wing in America has. We don't have the kind of consultants. And really, that should be a good thing, because we should be able to connect with people directly without the kind. I think people have a kind of they're somewhat nauseated by political messaging when they realize they're getting blitzed with it. But of course, the consultants know that it works. In fact, maybe turning people off of politics is really one of the main goals of American right-wing political media, and chasing people away. But right now, the Democratic Party, and again, no secrets here, I'm the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America. I think we have an economic platform that is what the American people want to see. Again, in light of what I said in the previous segment, that we've had essentially economic stagnation or worse for the general population over the last 15 years. And there's a real appetite out there for the adoption of what could be called social democratic economic measures, back to, but now fully inclusive, the economics that we saw in the United States in the post-World War II era, but not since Ronald Reagan was president. And again, I think the American public would attract to this. And if we emphasize in ways that right now, when people think about what progressives stand for, a basically more fair economic deal is not the first thing they think of. And I think that's our strongest suit.
Professor Kaye, the other thing about this is it's good politics. Right. One thing Republicans know how to do is to get people to vote against their own best economic interests. But the prize at the end of the rainbow for Republicans know how to reward their constituents with that prize, even though it's the wrong prize, right? It's anger, it's hatred, it's vitriol, it's whatever. In this case, the Democrats could literally give Americans what they need to survive and never stop winning. Okay, it is a winning proposition because people need to survive. And yet, despite the good politics of it, Professor Kaye, it seems to be that the powerful will not do it. They would rather lose an election than to do the smart political thing.
It is striking. I mean, actually, if we could go back to the 70s, I know we've talked a lot about Reagan, but it is significant to note that it was in the late 70s, under President Jimmy Carter, that the Democrats began to move in a neoliberal direction, not only in terms of public policy, but they also went out of their way to recruit dollars into the Democratic Party. And as a very senior historian friend of mine who's lived well into his 90s said, sounding like he was a populist in the late 19th century, the Democrats sold out to the money power for all too many years. And in fact, but with all of this bleakness that we see, there is something to be very hopeful about and to take action. And that is that Bernie Sanders showed the possibilities, number one, of doing a grassroots type of fundraising. That's important. Secondly, he showed that Americans are, at least a goodly number of Americans, are ready to transform the United States if given the opportunity. And let's not forget, in 2016, and I'm willing to put money on this, Bernie would have beaten Trump, okay? Absolutely. Because of the states that Hillary lost, Bernie would have won. Those were strong places for him.
That's right.
But beyond that, we also now have, I mean, let's consider, we now have a social democratic caucus within the Democratic Party, not the entire progressive caucus necessarily, but these young folks like Cori Bush and AOC and Bowman, they represent a social democratic caucus. And PDA and other groups have basically said, look, and this is what our Economic Bill of Rights call is all about. We're asking new and older progressive candidates to embrace this Economic Bill of Rights and commit to the pursuit of a social democratic America in hopes that that they will save the Democratic Party in 2022 from a debacle reminiscent of 1994 and 2010. This is a plan. Look, the majority of Americans want health care. They want education. They want a guaranteed job with a living wage. And we could go on and on. So here's the platform. I'm going to hand over to Alan because he can talk specifically about a few candidates that people should pay attention to because they are part of this social democratic push.
Okay.
Well, handing off to me, I do want to jump right in here, too, because I want to talk a little bit about the relationship of the Economic Bill of Rights to American structural racism. I mean, we can go through the various tenets of the bill, but I don't think it's a mystery to anybody listening or anybody who has their eyes open in American society that poverty in the United States has been concentrated throughout its entire history among Black Americans. When you look at the unemployment rate, it's consistently different between Black Americans and white Americans. So the immediate largest beneficiaries of an Economic Bill of Rights would be communities and poor communities and communities of color. And there are, of course, in population centers, as well as in small town America, but very conspicuous in population centers. You know, they're food deserts, economic deserts, healthcare deserts, and they tend to be concentrated in neighborhoods that are disproportionately Black. And an Economic Bill of Rights would directly be attack that reality and seek to transform that reality directly and aggressively. It would directly and aggressively attack the racial wealth gap. I personally believe, and I should mention the Professor William Darity, I personally believe that on top of that, yes, there should be more reparative economic justice, but this would definitely get us a brilliant start in terms of that direction. And I think white America, enough Americans are open to this right now to want to achieve it. And I think it can be achieved as part of an anti-racist political platform. And, having said that, we do have to be realistic about the way white America has voted historically. Currently, most white Americans do vote for the Republican Party. And it's been part of a sort of racist economic social contract that's existed. And white Americans have believed that it's to their benefit not to improve the lives of poor people. And I think we have to demand politically and advocate for this kind of universal program to achieve the kind of transformation that we need in this society as we begin to address economic structural racism.
James, DJ Exclusive, what's that saying? Or actually, I can ask either any of you. What's that saying? You swipe the nose to spite the face? Because it seems like
you cut off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, you cut off your nose. It seems like Republicans are really happy with cutting off their nose to spite their face because they would also benefit from these policies. Professor Harvey Kaye, it is always a pleasure. Brother Alan Minsky, it is always a pleasure. Before we get you out of here, how can people join up to support the push? Because this is not just an article. This is a movement. You are trying to get solidarity around it. How can people support the movement?
Alan?
Well, again, one of the people we've been working on this most closely has been Senator Nina Turner, who's running for Congress. Harvey Kaye and I are going to be appearing with her on April 4th. And one of the things with delivering this or releasing it to the public this past month is it's been really overwhelmed by the news on Ukraine. And we've sort of paced ourselves in the way we've sort of led forth with this. We're going to be working with Senator Vincent Fort, who's running for Congress in the Georgia's 13th district as well. And so we really want to get a big lift on this, and we want to just get word out about it. We really now are in the home stretch already for the primary season, and we want to see candidates that endorse this be embraced and to lift it up as part of the strategy to achieve a Democratic victory in the midterms. Let's get 52 senators into the Senate so we can marginalize Sinema and Manchin, and let's do it by calling for economic policies that appeal to all Americans and can produce a much better result than the political pundits believe will be the case in November.
I would add just that vote for the candidate who not only promises to fight for you, vote for the candidate who inspires the fight in you.
You said, James, I heard you over there. You said, Jada, come on. Professor Kaye, you said a word right there. And Brother Allen, listen, I want to connect with you because I want to hit the ground. Like we got to, this has to happen on the grassroots, ground level organizing. You mentioned Nina Turner. She'll be on the show with us next week. And so we'll ask her about all these things. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.